today. Our web series is being put on by the Northwestern Prevention Collaborative, and the collaborative is a partnership among 3 substance abuse coalitions in the Lord Fairfax Planning District, representing the city of Winchester and the counties of Clark, Frederick, Page, Shenandoah, and Warren. Focusing on the heroin opioid epidemic, the collaborative has dual goals of preventing young people from abusing prescription drugs and reducing the number of heroin prescription drug overdose deaths. Northwestern Prevention Collaborative is funded by the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. So I just want to introduce all of you to the series that we're putting on. The faith-based web series will maintain the mission of the original symposium that we had planned before COVID, with an emphasis on the unique challenges brought on by COVID. We are going to be focusing on the intersection of stress and anxiety, COVID-19, and substance misuse in the community. We hope to share tools with all of you for taking care of a faith community during the pandemic. And we recognize the need for support and sharing among community partners. So we're really excited for this morning of learning and collaboration. I just want to share a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Each of you will remain muted with your video turned off during the presentation, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions throughout the presentation. So as questions come up for you, I invite you to send them my way. You can send your questions directly to me in the Zoom chat. You can just select my name, Casey Dwyer, from the drop-down, and I'll be able to ask those questions to our speaker throughout the presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have a time to kind of open the floor and allow you to ask your questions for yourself. So feel free to send them my way if there's a particular point or topic that strikes you. Send me that question, otherwise you can share at the end. So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker. Christa Shifflett completed her collegiate studies at the College of William and Mary, earning bachelor's degrees in government and economics, and she earned a master's degree in education from James Madison University. Christa became the executive director of the Warren Coalition in 2010. Christa is a certified trauma professional and a master trauma trainer for Virginia. She's also a certified anger management and anxiety specialist with the court systems, who works at RSW Regional Jail a couple days a week. She is a certified getting relationships right trainer and is currently pursuing additional certifications for helping people and communities build resilience. Christa has spoken at numerous state and national conferences, including Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America's National Conference in 2018 and 2019, the Northwest Alcohol and Prevention of Youth Substance Abuse Conference. She'll be speaking at the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America's mid-year conference in 2020. Christa, thank you for being here. I'm going to hand this over to you.
Thank you very much, Casey. Good morning to everyone. For those of you who know me and those of you who are about to get to know me, I am a talker, and I could talk for hours about all of this. I have been in the field of trying to prevent substance misuse for 20 years now. And we are obviously in the middle of a pandemic, but we are also in the middle of an epidemic with opiates, and it has not gone away. It's just our focus has shifted. So as I go through this morning, I'm not just going to be talking about opiates when we're talking about substance misuse. I'm going to be talking about all the substances, and I've got some data in here for those of you who don't like data, sorry. But there's going to also be some polling. So you will literally see a picture of the North Pole popping up, and then a poll is going to follow. So I would appreciate responses to those as we go along. And like Casey said, you're going to see pictures of our beautiful valley, and at that point she's going to entertain questions. It'll be throughout the presentation. And please feel free to ask questions, and I'm going to talk quickly. This presentation I've added slides to, I've done, it's taken me an hour and a half without the slides, so buckle up because we're going to go with a little speed here this morning. If I can get the presentation to go. Here we go. All right, so first I want to just sort of talk about how our body works. We have a sympathetic nervous system, and I'm not going to read to you, that is our fight or flight system. You don't think when you go into your sympathetic nervous system, and it's really about survival. So your body is meant to be in this in times of crisis, and then it's meant to leave it. And you get large rushes of cortisol and adrenaline to help you get away from whatever's threatening you. And then that passes. But what we're talking about now with this pandemic is that there are a lot of people who are operating in their sympathetic nervous system all the time. This is really bad for your body. Your body isn't meant to be overwhelmed by cortisol and adrenaline all the time. And so we're going to talk about, that detrimental sort of effect, but also how do we try to get back to calm here. So let's talk about your parasympathetic nervous system. And your parasympathetic nervous system, this picture I absolutely love, is when you are really chill, when you can just be relaxed. It happens in your frontal cortex, and you are able to think. This is the part of your brain where thought happens. And for all of us, we'd like to function out of this part of our brain all the time. This is sort of your maximal functioning place. Unless, of course, you're being threatened. If you're about to be run over by a semi-truck, you don't want to be in your parasympathetic system. You're going to get smooched. But otherwise, this is where we make our rational decisions. This is the place that people would like to operate from. Your last nervous system is sort of what I think of as your down deep nervous system. And this is your vagal system. This is freeze. This is where freeze comes from. And this is basically happens to people who are in that prolonged traumatic stress response. So when you are in overdrive with your with your sympathetic nervous system, you will eventually go to vagal. And what happens with that is that you basically numb out. You lose feelings. You may even disassociate from your body. And you're not emotionally connected to what is going on around you. Now, this might be safe. This may be if you're in a household as a child and you're growing up and you are, being molested by your father every night, and you can't get away. This is how you basically protect yourself. This is where you go to hide. The problem is when you go to vagal for a really long time, when you come out of it, or when you're away from the danger, you've learned to live there, and you are not emotionally connected to the world. You're going to have a lot of trouble with forming positive relationships and bonds because you've really never been in your body. Okay, so time for the first poll. Poll mistress? I'm not driving the train on the polls. Aha. Oh, just question 1, please. Don't do 2 or 3. I don't know if we can fix that. But vote for question 1. Are we not able to answer the polls?
It sounds like maybe we do have to answer the questions that are up there to submit. So
okay, well then we'll have to, hopefully I can go back and see the results of those, but then answer all of those then if that's how we're set up, please. When we come to the next poll, hopefully you can pull those results back up for me so that I can see the results.
Mm-hmm.
So please take a minute and answer those. Let's give that just about another 30 seconds or so. So if you're on and you haven't answered, please take a minute. I'm not sure how that number 3 is going because I can't see all of that, what you guys are allowed to choose with that. I was hoping maybe we'd have radial buttons, but we'll come back to that because that's later in the presentation. I will talk about that. Okay. So can we stop the poll, please? All right. And then, so it looks like about 71% of people feel like they've experienced increased stress or anxiety since we started with the pandemic. And the next part is further down. I'm sorry, these are all popping up at once. So we'll come further in the presentation about, I may call upon some of you who said that you think you can tell me the 2 biggest causes of relapse, to share those, and we'll come back down to 3. So I'm going to shut that. And I am going to progress here, maybe. All right, so let's just take a minute to talk about the difference between stress and anxiety. And so you know the 2 things that are happening. And I'm not going to read to you guys because you can read, but the important thing about stress is that stress can be helpful. Stress does move us to do things and get things done sometimes. But it also goes away when whatever is causing you the stress has passed. And I'll give you an example. So I was working on a huge federal grant last week, and I've been working on it for 2 weeks. And for those of you who don't do federal grant work, federal grants are always due at 11:59:59 p.m. And I'd been working away, and about 20 minutes to 12, I had finally finished the grant. I printed it, and I had to go upstairs to scan it in. I had all the attachments that had about 40 pages that had to go in. Everything else was up. I started scanning, and my scanner kept jamming. Well, the more that happened, obviously time is ticking, the more stressed I got, the more anxious I got, to the point where I was crying, I was shaking. I'd spent probably, I can't even begin to tell you, 90 hours on trying to get this done, and I was ill. So I did finally get it in, but for 2 hours after that, I hadn't eaten anything for hours. I mean, since maybe 10 o'clock that morning, I just sat and worked. I was trying to eat. I was still shaking so badly I couldn't get the fork to my mouth. And 2 hours later, I was calm enough, so at 2 o'clock in the morning, that I could think about going to sleep. So that's that stress response. That's that flood of cortisol and adrenaline. But the next day, I was over it. It was gone. Stress. Anxiety would have been the next day as I kept going up, oh no, what if those were just wrong? What if I was just getting those notifications that everything was in and good, but I wasn't really getting them? And then I'm going to hear back from that. And 3 days later, I'm still thinking, oh, something bad's going to happen. It's going to go wrong. And I'm still focused on that. So sort of the difference between those two things happening. So stress, you experience stress in 4 different ways. And I can tell you, for a long time, and some of these you might experience with anxiety too, but for a long time, I didn't necessarily recognize some of these symptoms as possibly being stress signs for me. I can remember I went to the doctor, I was probably in my mid 30s, and I kept having chest pain and fairly significant chest pain. So I thought I'd go to the doctor, and I went to the doctor, and they're like, well, you sound great. Everything sounds good. And, we can put you on a Holter monitor, but we think you're fine. We suspect this is just a stress response. And so you just need to try to learn to relax, cut down on, I had a lot of different demands. I was working 2 jobs. I had 2 kids. I was in school. And try to find ways to relax and to help relieve that stress. But I thought I was ill. And not that you shouldn't go to the hospital if you're having chest pains. And I obviously went to the doctor, but I was fine. Okay, so again, one of the ones about emotional that I want to talk about for just a second is sometimes I think people don't recognize that being stressed and also even maybe going to anxiety is that you can really feel just sad. You can feel unhappy as part of that. And so keeping sort of that in mind, when this started, it was probably, I don't know, a month into maybe what was happening. I said, I am really depressed. I just feel so depressed and disconnected. But when I think about that, I can go back and think, well, am I depressed, or is that a result of being anxious? Because I have been anxious about things happening and worrying about people I know who are vulnerable and being afraid something bad would happen to them, and not wanting to lose people that I cared about. So, some of that is sort of self-awareness, and you don't necessarily have to label it to be perfectly right, but at least be in touch with your feelings and try to figure out, what's going on and how you're feeling. That only see the negative. We are wired for survival to operate from the negative. We are there to plan for, what if this goes wrong, what are we going to do? Or if this happens, what are we going to do? Or if this happens, what are we going to do? Just sort of have plans to go forward. We are wired that way. But if you can never see the good side, so yes, maybe you don't like being at home, but maybe being able to spend more time with your children has been a positive that you haven't had before. Then that would be good. If you can just only see negative, that's a problem. That racing thoughts, particularly when you lay down to go to sleep, if you can't go to sleep because you can't turn your brain off and it just goes and goes and goes, be going back to, are we operating from stress and anxiety? And then behaviorally, I think one of the biggest ones there is using substances to relax in what context of what we're talking about, and we're going to get down to talking about that in a little bit, and what is going on now during this pandemic, and then how we can help, how we can all sort of come together and help, and checking in with ourselves as well. What kind of support do we need? And sometimes we are in a world where we're often taught that it's not okay to ask for help, and that it's weak. And I've certainly, in working with jail populations, 95% of those people would tell you that it would be weak to ask for help, that they don't want to make themselves seem vulnerable, that people could take advantage of them. And so then they just aren't willing to reach out to anyone, can't figure out how to get out of where they are, and basically suffer alone. Okay, so just a quick chart so you can sort of see the difference between everyday anxiety, and people do have everyday anxiety, and that's fine. You know, you worry, am I gonna, you know, get this job if I'm interviewed, or um, you know, am I gonna have enough money to pay the rent, or something like that. Or you know, people may have anxiety. I can say today I wasn't anxious about giving this talk. I've given it numerous times, but if I am giving a talk that I have never given before, you know, I might have anxiety in that moment. But sort of look at the other side of that. On the anxiety, and we're going to talk about each of these anxiety disorders quickly as we go along, but you know, I work with people who won't go to the grocery store. They'll go to Walmart at 2 in the morning because they don't want to have to come in contact with other people. They really just want to be able to get their stuff, use the self-checkout, and get out and not have to have any connection with anybody else. That would be, you know, that these people have a social anxiety disorder. They may have a generalized anxiety disorder, but I mean, they will alter their life patterns so that they can avoid being around other people. And we'll talk a little bit about isolation as we go along in this. Okay, so these are your different types of anxiety disorders. I'll take just a minute and sort of give you the brief rundown on what these look like. Okay, so a panic disorder basically starts, there is anxiety. Then the person has a panic attack. They're afraid they're going to have another one because there's a lot of feeling of loss of control with a panic attack. They may be afraid they're actually dying. So then they're afraid they're going to have another one. Well, guess what? That produces more anxiety, which then brings on another attack, and round we go. So panic disorders are cyclical and just sort of build and go and build and go. And really take a hard toll on the people who are struggling with them. My husband suffers from panic disorder. I have been in the emergency room with him multiple times because he was sure he was having a heart attack, feels like he's dying. And then, of course, there's sort of the shame that happens around that because he's been put in the hospital. They might keep him overnight for observation. There's nothing wrong with him. You know, then it's like, oh, I'm just crazy. That sort of self-deprecation happening. And I spent all that money unnecessarily, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a difficult place to operate from. So I've sort of talked a little bit about these. You guys can see you guys can sort of see symptoms of those. And I will tell you, just with regular anxiety, you know, you may have a rapid or pounding heart rate. It doesn't necessarily have to just be with panic disorder symptoms. If you're feeling anxious, you may well feel that your heart is beating hard. Few more of these. All right, so let's talk about GAD, or generalized anxiety disorder. And some of these symptoms with this will also bleed over into people who struggle with PTSD, that hypervigilant. I can walk into, if I go into the jail and I go into one of the big pods, I can pick out people who either have the GAD or PTSD by where they're sitting in the pod. That they might have their back to the wall so no one can get to them, and they'll be seated in a place where they can see the whole room. And if I ever interact with those people individually, it'll be abundantly clear in a short time that either they're struggling with some form of anxiety, or perhaps something really bad and traumatic has happened to them. We did talk about the racing thoughts and having a hard time falling asleep. And this is frequently when people struggle with this. It's what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? And then sort of catastrophizing what's happening out that. Well, if that happens, then I'll lose my job. And if that happens, then I'll lose my house. And if that happens, then I'll lose my car. And if that happens, then I'll live under a bridge. And if that happens, sort of catastrophizing what's going on here. Okay. I talked a little bit about social anxiety. I see a lot of these symptoms with a lot of the people that I work with in the jail system, and frequently this leads to people operating in isolation and trying to calm those fears. And it also leads people to developing substance use disorders in some cases. There'll be a lot of what they call pre-gaming, so a lot of partying before they even go to a party, because they can't go to the party unless they're drunk or stoned, because they couldn't stand to be around people if they weren't altered. That's the way they tame that social anxiety. That's how they're able to function in that. People in the jail would talk about others and say, oh, they were a great person. I was like, well, did you knew them on the street? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, well, what was that? What was that like? Oh, I don't know. I was always high. They were always high. They were great. Now they're not high and they're really annoying. And so then you sort of understand why people are working to, or why people are taking substances so that they can fit in when they're struggling with social anxiety or something else. And then when they're in situations where they don't have access to what was changing that personality or bringing down that anxiety, people don't like them, which of course then they would all go back into isolation, start to take other substances, and the cycle sort of continues here. Okay, so I want to say something about OCD that I learned, I don't know, maybe in the last 3 or 4 years that I didn't know. Maybe you all know this and I was just the last one behind this curve, but you can actually develop OCD from certain strep infections. So there's a type of strep, and I'm sorry, I don't know which strain of strep it is, but if you contract that, it actually causes people to develop OCD. And I actually have a niece that this happened to, and this is how I know this. And so that was really interesting. If you see behavioral changes, particularly in young people and children, and they've had a lot of strep, she actually had scarlet fever too, and they start with some of these symptoms in here, and the compulsions and some of those sorts of things, it may well have been caused by that strep, which I just thought I'd share. The obsessions are thoughts that are over and over. These are people who also, your desks may just have to be in a certain way. I had a friend in school, and people were mean to him and they would torment him, but he had to have everything say just so. And if you moved his pencil 1/4 of an inch that was laid on his desk, he would know it and he would move it back the 1/4 of an inch. Things like, I had another girl I work with, and she would get up about every half an hour during the night to wipe out her sinks. So if the faucet had dripped, she couldn't stand to have a drop of water in the sink, and she would get up and wipe it out through the night, basically. So it can be very destructive to people being able to interact with the world if they're having to act on these compulsions. And so you have your compulsions, and they're doing it to just try to bring down their level of stress, or the fear that things aren't perfectly clean or whatever. And it's not that the people don't know that these things are irrational, but they just sort of have to rely on these to get through their day. And I sort of gave you some examples of some of that, the cleaning. You might go back, maybe you go and make sure the stove's off before you go to bed, and then you get up 2 hours later to make sure the stove is off, and then 2 hours later you're getting back up to make sure the stove is off, something like that. All right, so here's some contributors to stress and anxiety. We have certainly got a lot of this sort of colliding and crashing at this point in time. Life change is happening for people. People may suddenly be unemployed, not know the status of when they're going back even to their office if they're not unemployed. Maybe you've been ill, or someone has been ill, and you're not able to do the things that you were able to do previously because COVID has somehow impacted your pulmonary system and you're not getting around like you used to before. Maybe somebody you care about has been lost in this pandemic. So those sorts of things are just adding to what already contributes in anxiety that may not have anything to do with what's going on with the current pandemic. All right, So we've hit our first mountains. I'm doing okay on time. I'm happy about that. So Casey, do you have any questions or comments you want to share?
We don't have any questions yet from the crowd. So I would say let's keep going, and everyone just remember that you can submit those questions to me. It'll be nice to be able to ask some of those questions throughout the presentation as well as at the end.
All righty. Now we already answered this poll. Sorry, we had a little hitch with that. But this poll I was asking about, could you tell me about the things that cause people, oh, not that one, the next one. Ask, could you tell me the two characteristics that are what causes people if they're in recovery to relapse? So here you go. So can we, guys, take just another second and answer this one again for me? Thank you for fixing that. And then I want to talk about these for a minute as we sort of go where we're going. Give it about another 20 seconds. Please answer those for me just so I could sort of see where we are. All righty. All right. You want to go ahead and end that? Or I'm going to end that. Thank you. So 75% of you indicated no. For those of you who indicated you felt like you could you share your answers to the two biggest causes of relapse in the chat? And Casey, if you're getting those, could you share those with me?
Yep, someone wrote depression and anxiety.
Okay, what else? Do you have other ideas?
Someone else said isolation and depression. Someone else said stress and emotion, and either being connected with people or places who participated in addictive behavior or overconfidence in one's own recovery. Someone else said stress and anxiety.
Okay. So let me just speak to, when I teach this, what I'm going to tell you, I believe are the two biggest causes. So stress is a huge cause of relapse for people. And the other thing that's a huge cause, and someone was mentioning person, places, and things. So it would be craving. It would be that the feeling that you cannot overcome the desire to use whatever substance it is that's helping you through the day. And those are frequently triggered by those person, places, those sorts of things that people interact with that bring on that craving. Not always, but that's part of it. And we were talking about isolation. So that goes back to places, and we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Maybe I can go ahead. Okay. So Casey told you in the introduction that I am a master trauma trainer for Virginia. And while I am not going to do a training about trauma today, I did want to share this sort of as a basis before we move into this next section, which is, looking at substance use disorders and what is going on. So Dr. Robert Anda and Dr. Folletti, who were both M.D. docs, one worked for the CDC and one worked for Kaiser Permanente, did a bunch of studies and looked at 17,000 people's health charts and figured out that based on a list of adverse childhood experiences, that these people were more likely to have certain health problems as they went along, and also certain social issues as well. And this, based on this study, they came out with population attributable risks. Now, what does this mean? This means that if someone is an IV drug user, 78% of the people who partake in IV drug use, that use can be attributed to early childhood trauma. Okay, so that's what this wheel is telling you. It doesn't mean that if you had trauma in childhood, there's a 78% chance that you're going to have IV drug use. That's not what this wheel says. This wheel says that if you are engaging it, 78% of that use stems back to trauma in childhood. Okay, so that's how we're interpreting. So I just wanted you guys to sort of see the percentages that were associated with childhood trauma as we go forward. And there are lots of different wheels. This is not the only wheel. There are like 6 or 7 of these. But this is helpful sort of groundwork as we move forward into what is going on now with the pandemic and just sort of things that have happened in past life experiences. Okay, so they are predicting that COVID-19 will create long-lasting trauma. You just saw the wheel that went with long-lasting trauma impacts and the outcomes that if people start engaging in poor behaviors, a lot of that is related to, in that case, childhood trauma. But you can have changes in behavior with trauma anytime during your life. So we are already starting to see spikes in overdoses and increases in substance use disorders and substance use. I know I got data for this grant, and that in Warren County, we had 21 more people admitted to the emergency room for overdoses through mid-May than we'd had for the entire year in 2019. So this is happening, it's real. We've had more overdose deaths as well than we've had compared to years, like in years in the past so far this year. So we do need to be really aware of that. And when we think overdoses, I don't want you to just think, oh, she's talking about opiates. There was a CDC study in 2008 after Katrina happened, and they were looking at hospitalization rates around, and obviously this is very localized, but hospitalization rates in New Orleans after Katrina and what was happening. And what they saw was there was a 35% increase in hospitalizations for alcohol overdoses, alcohol poisonings, that the rate had gone up that high. So I don't want you to just think, oh, she's only talking about people who are using heroin. I am talking about people who are using any kind of substances that might alter how they interact with the world, and seeing spikes in those kind of overdoses. All right, so just some figures for you. There's been a huge increase in alcohol sales since this started. And I'm gonna, the slide behind this will talk about how much people are reporting alcohol use. I did read a study while I was putting this together that was saying, lots of us are working from home, and it indicated that about a third of the people who are working from home are actually consuming alcohol during the workday while they are working from home. So that's a shift in behavior. The vast majority of us don't work from home on a regular basis, but now they are home. And so alcohol use is increasing by people who wouldn't normally be drinking at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because they'd be sitting in their office. So this is just something to be aware of, because obviously for those people who have the propensity and all the factors are aligned, they think we may start to see people develop some sort of a substance use disorder because of what is going on with this pandemic. So this was a survey, and I put the bottom, I cited that on the bottom, and you guys will have access to this PowerPoint. I do ask that, I'm happy to have you look at it, but don't don't commandeer it, I guess. I'll say it that way. So this was the results of the surveys that they did at this recovery village that they were sending out to people. And you can see that this is their increase of use since the pandemic began. And obviously alcohol, highest on the list, easiest to obtain. But people may be turning to other things to help them cope with what's going on. So then they went a little further and they asked them, you know, what is going on with your use? Is this a change in use? And you can see on this chart that people were reporting that there were increases, and some were reporting a large increase. I was having a conversation with someone about alcohol consumption, regular alcohol consumption not long ago, and what they said to me was, well, are you asking me pre-COVID or are you asking me now? Because there is definitely a difference between how I drank before and how I am drinking now. So we all just need to be aware of coping strategies here. We'll talk about how can we help people build some of those. And you can see some reasons. They asked them why people were relying on additional substances, and their responses were coping with stress, which we talked about. For people who are in recovery is one of the biggest causes of relapse. They were bored, or they are having other symptoms that they were trying to help diminish. So I want to just, before I go back to that, I'm going to talk about this for a minute, but let me just talk about, and I didn't put a slide on this, but let me just talk about the impact of substance use in conjunction with COVID-19 and some of the risks that are enhanced by using additional substances. So alcohol, primarily acts on lots of systems, but in this case, it's going to be impacting your liver and your overall immune system. So when you drink, it decreases your immune function. Your body has to go to fight the alcohol, which it perceives as a toxin. When you drink alcohol, basically the alarms go off in your body that say poison, 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 poison. And then your body goes into overdrive to clear it of the poison. So if you were to contract COVID during this time, and you're also drinking or using any of these other substances too, your body is not going to be able to combat it like it would, because it's also trying to get rid of the other toxins that you're putting in your body. So just keep that in mind. I would think that any kind of smoking, because obviously COVID is, what is killing people first and foremost is the pulmonary part of this. It affects your lungs. So people who are smoking, people who are vaping, people who are smoking marijuana or vaping marijuana, it decreases your lung capacity, as well as if you're smoking meth or smoking heroin. So your lungs are already had some compromise. They may have had long-term compromise because of use over time. So, I think about people who I work with in the jail who struggled, say, with a meth use disorder and had used for a long time, primarily smoked meth. Their lungs have been compromised already, and I worry that if they contract this, they'll be much more likely to succumb to the effects because their lungs are not healthy. So just keeping that in mind. And with the opiates, opiates don't, unless you're smoking them, opiates don't impact your lungs in the same way, but they do act on your brainstem, and they do slow down your respirations, so you're not breathing as much as you normally do. It's impairing your lung function from that standpoint. So then if you've got COVID on top of it, which is also impairing your lung function, you could be in a compromised situation. So I did just sort of want to add that as we're thinking about what's going along and why taking these substances might impact what's happening. Casey, I didn't have a stop in there, but do we have any comments on that before I sort of push into the rest of this?
Yeah, we do have a question.
Okay.
How can the faith-based community best connect their community and individuals with resources if someone is suffering from substance misuse as a result of COVID-19?
Yay. Well, I promise you, I'm not going to leave you without telling you that. I got slides and slides on things you guys can do to help. So I'm going to defer that one right now. I promise I will answer that before we leave and give you guys ways that you can help. So let me just sort of go a little bit further with stress and anxiety before we go back, and you guys can read some of these. If I were doing this live and I would really tell you all that deep breathing is really important for anyone in the minute. And I teach, this is going to sound really strange, but I teach deep breathing as part of my anxiety classes, because when you are anxious or you are stressed, you tend to do what they call chest breathe. You don't take deep breaths. You need to take deep breaths to break down the cortisol and the adrenaline that build up in your brain from stress and anxiety. And if you could see me, I would demonstrate how you do this. But you put a hand, if you want to know you're doing it, between your ribs, so just below your breastbone, and then you put your other hand on your belly button, and you breathe in through your nose. And when you breathe in through your nose, the hand on your belly button needs to push out. And then when you breathe in, and you also, when you breathe out, you also breathe out through your nose, not through your mouth. Okay, we're trying to do nose breathing because people switch back and forth and then they hyperventilate if they're breathing shallowly. So in through your nose, out through your nose. Your hand would sink back on your belly button so that you want to go back, so it's almost, you're thinking it's touching my spine. And one deep breath isn't going to do it if you're really anxious. You need to take many deep breaths. You want to break down that cortisol and adrenaline. If you struggle personally with stress and anxiety, I advise people before they get out of bed in the morning to put their hands where I suggested and take 10 deep breaths to try to clear out any built up cortisol and adrenaline. And then about the middle of the day, same pause, 10 deep breaths, help clear that out. And then when you get ready to go to bed at night, to help you wind down, to help you be able to go to sleep, again, the deep breathing to help dismiss some of what's going on. If we were in person, I would talk about visualization and we would do some muscle relaxation. I'm sorry I'm not there because I enjoy those parts of this presentation. I think the whole breakup of this audience, people are not necessarily from a church who are here, but maybe really involved in their faith communities in other ways. And however you seek a higher power, churches have been, obviously shuttered at this point in time. Some now are going back, some have online services, but everyone has the power, even if they're not in a church, to seek their higher power during the day. And that pauses and that connection to something greater than yourself can help if you want to give up some of that worry and anxiety, particularly if it's something that you can't fix. So you don't have any control over how long COVID-19 is going to last here. That's not something any of us have control over. And so giving that up to something greater than yourself, to a higher power, instilling your faith that this will work out the way it's meant to, is a way a lot of people find comfort, and you don't have to be in the church to do that. So just saying that to people who are working in the faith community, or even just are part of it and it's important to them, reaching out and encouraging people to find that peace within themselves every day is a powerful way to give people comfort during this time. And so I would encourage you to do that, not only for yourself, but if you're acting in the, if you're a minister or a rabbi or a priest or what have you, reaching out to the people who are part of your congregation and giving them that support and encouraging them to do that every day and give up some of their stress and anxiety when it's not something they can manage. And, some of that is about, I think about the sort of the serenity prayer when you think about that, and, sort of that acceptance, but also giving it up if you can't change it. sort of surrendering that, which is part of, when people go into recovery, some of that recognition is about surrendering that there are things that are out of their control and that they need support from others, something greater than themselves to help in that recovery. The last thing is acts of kindness. We can all help one another, and we desperately need to do that right now. Not just with COVID, but what is happening with the divisiveness that is happening in the United States at this moment in time. And I will tell you, in working with people who struggle with some sort of substance use disorders, that some of the biggest changes I see with them is when they start giving to others and doing things for others. And I had a young lady that I worked with in the jail, and she had gotten on work release. Well, they don't call it work release, they call it, there's another distinction, which means you're not getting paid. So you're doing it on a volunteer basis within the jail, and you have to do it for free before you actually get paid. And what she was doing as hers was she was going to the park. So she worked for Warren County Parks and Recreation, and they were going around and they were cleaning up the parks, and they were mowing the grass and planting flowers and doing things to make life better for other people. And she got such a high from doing that she would tell me that she would be awake at 5 o'clock every morning. She didn't have to be waiting. She'd be dressed, she'd have her clothes on to go out and make a difference to someone else and be outside of herself. Another young man I work with has really gotten into, he's in the treatment pod and he's taken it very seriously. And if I talk about him too long, I will cry, but has really, really changed his life. And he gets out of bed every morning with the purpose of helping other people find recovery and find those practices. And what he says to me is helping them is helping me. He said it's really selfish, but he says it's the high better than any high he ever got from meth in his life. So act of kindness to other people is really important, not only for people who are not struggling with some sort of substance use disorder, but for everyone. When you're outside of yourself, you don't spend time mulling over your own thoughts and you're doing things for the greater good or for other people with no expectation of reward in the end, is a great way to help with stress and anxiety. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as I go along. Okay, so here are some other things that we can do, and these are things that you can pass along. So positive coping statements. I've been through difficult times before. I've gotten through them. I can get through this. Sometimes mapping strategies is you lay out the problem in the middle, and then you lay out possible solutions that go out from it, and then try and pick a direction. Mindfulness is being present in the exact moment. If you are present in your life right now, you are not worrying about other things. You are concentrating on what is happening in this minute. Am I fully present? I have people do exercises, and obviously they're limited a little bit in the jail, but pay attention to what it feels like to brush your teeth. We do it all so automatically. Feel how that the bristles feel on every tooth. Be aware of the taste of the toothpaste. How does that feel, the difference in the bristles feel on your tongue that it does on your teeth? That's really being present in that moment, and it gets you out of your head around the worry and the anxiety. And I'm just saying, I'm sure there are others on this call where I have driven to work, and I work in Front Royal, I live in Winchester, so I have a half an hour drive, and I'll have gotten to Front Royal and not observed anything along the way, because I am so in my head about what I have to get done that day, what's going to happen next, how am I going to get this done, what's going to happen now, blah, 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 blah. And the stress of the day keeps you from being present in my life. We live in a beautiful area. The drive from here to Front Royal is stunning no matter the season. And sometimes I don't even take time to stop and appreciate that. So those are slow down, be aware of what's going on around you, be present. And sometimes people are so not present that even things like can you feel your feet on the floor? Feel what it feels like to have your feet on the floor. That's sort of a grounding. That's, are you present? Are you in your body? Or is your mind so far away and you're so removed that you're not even living your life. You're a body, but you're not even here. So do that one day at a time. Obviously, a big slogan for people who are in recovery. And we are, the future isn't promised, the past is behind us. So what we have is the present, and treat it as a present. And that's a way to think about, how are we getting through the day? Be thankful for that. And that goes back to that attitude of gratitude. People in jail are like, well, I'm in jail, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, so you can't find anything to be thankful for. There's nothing to be thankful for today. Even if it says, I got a fresh baked cookie on my tray. That's something to be thankful for. You're still alive. How many of your friends aren't? And so trying to find that attitude of gratitude is important. Fighting anxiety, not helpful. Just creates that whole getting caught up in that cycle of more anxiety. Just sort of roll with it. It's okay. I'm anxious. It's stress. It will pass. This will be okay. And not letting it control you or fight against it. And making lists. Now, I am a list person, and I have lists for my lists that have lists for them. But small, manageable bites. So while I have a list right now that is basically 2 sheets of paper long, I look at that list, prioritize what's most important that I get done today, and put that on a smaller list, and then cross that off. And then I have the joy of going off and crossing it off my bigger list. So it's like double accomplishments. So, small bite-sized pieces, folks, because you just overwhelm yourself if you're not doing that. And that for other people too. And if we're trying to support other people who are struggling, and our poll indicated a lot of us have increased stress and anxiety. So there should be a lot of empathy for others to think that, they may be in that exact same place. And I don't know any of your all's socioeconomic status. I don't know whether you've lost your jobs, whether you're still working, any of that stuff that's going on. But if you're in the same place you were, except now you have to stay in your house, and you're interacting with people, in your positions who have lost their jobs and don't know how to pay their rent and all those other sorts of things, their stress and anxiety is through the roof. So providing that, I understand why you feel that way, makes total sense to me. What kind of plan can I help you lay out? First steps, so you're not overwhelmed by all these problems. And what are you going to work on fixing first? Prioritizing, what's the most important? And hearing from them, you've given me 4 different problems. Which one of these do you think is the most important? Prioritizing that. And going back to, okay, how can I help you lay out these steps? What can I do to assist you? You don't want to take over. You don't want to do everything for them, because then you get that learned helplessness going on, and that's not good for anybody. But, how can I support you? I can't afford to pay for my internet. I can't get there. I don't know, I don't know the number for this or that. Okay, I'll look those up and I'll send them to you so you can make the calls or do whatever. That support but not take over is important. I just want to talk about a worry jar for a minute. So for those of you who struggle with anxiety, or like would be diagnosable anxiety, not day-to-day anxiety, but more diagnosable kind of anxiety, a worry jar is a really good idea, so that you don't spend all day worrying. When the thoughts happen, you write them down on a piece of paper and you put a lid on the jar, and you're not allowed to entertain those thoughts until it's worry time. And then you pick a time of the day when it's time to worry, and you bring out every one of the sheets in there, and you just worry your little head off for half an hour. You can worry to your heart's content for half an hour. After that half an hour is over, you take those worries and you write down what you're going to do to solve them. if the answer to the question is you can't solve them, I go back to what I was talking about before with higher power. Give them up to a higher power. There is no point worrying about things that you have no control over and that you can't fix. So focus on what you can fix. It will help reduce your anxiety, and it will help you make progress moving forward. And I would encourage all of you, you know, from a faith-based standpoint, to do the same thing. Encourage people to give up those worries if they can't solve them. Try, but if there aren't any answers to the question, well, you know, they're part of the faith community for a reason. Give that up to, you know, however you are worshiping, whomever you are worshiping, and let that happen as it will. And that's a way to help reduce that stress and anxiety. All right. So fear, I like this acronym. So this is false evidence that appears real. And so, oh, you know, this has got to be it. This is what they're trying to do. There can't be any other explanations for what's going on. Well, that's not necessarily it. And so I had a guy I was working with in jail, and his wife wasn't answering the phone. And he was 100% convinced that she was having an affair with the neighbor. And it was driving him insane. And so I said, well, let's think of other explanations for maybe why she's not answering the phone. And so we made a list of other reasons why she might not be answering the phone, so that when he got her on the phone, instead of exploding and screaming at her and calling her all sorts of names or doing whatever and, you know, accusing her of having an affair, he had his head a little bit better together. He'd calmed down on the anger and the anxiety, and he said, you know, I've been trying to reach you, been worried, what's going on? And so she, you know, she had shared what was happening and why she hadn't been able to answer the phone. And then things were better. And so jumping to those false conclusions, just because you think it doesn't mean it's true. Considering other evidence, looking across the spectrum, that's helpful. And that's helpful if you're trying to help other people through it. If there are flaws in their thinking, okay, but you know, this can't possibly be the way it is. This is why, pointing it out. Now they may not come around to rational, and we talked about obsessive compulsive or whatever, but at least you're sort of pointing them out. Give them that seed to think about, right? Small steps. I had a guy who had horrible social anxiety, and he desperately wanted to be able to go out in public, but his way to do that was consume half a gallon of Jack. And then he's out of his head, and then he ended up going to jail. But he wanted to be able to interact with people. And so we talked about strategies of, could you tolerate this? Could you manage to do this? You know, how about, he wanted to go to college. How about an online class first? Could you tolerate that? Not in person. Let's wade in that water to begin with and see if you can tolerate that. And then maybe as you get to know people through the online, you'd be in a place where you could go out and meet one of them and, you know, go for a jog or go fishing or do something else. And so baby steps, and so that they're not freaking out when you're suggesting it. He was having a panic attack taking the anxiety assessment. That's how anxious he was. So, you know, we're not pushing people over cliffs here. Very small steps. What would you be willing to do? Do you think you could walk down Main Street, half a block on Main Street at 2 p.m? And then once they accomplish that, you know, how was that? Was that okay? Oh yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought. I was scared, but then I was good. Then they're encouraged to move forward. And then positive reinforcement all the time. Wow, that's great. You know, a week ago, you couldn't have walked half a block down Main Street at 2 o'clock. You must be so proud of yourself. And it's really important that it's not that you are giving that, I'm so proud of you. You must be so proud of yourself. That needs to come from within. That helps build that confidence. That helps reduce some of that anxiety. So not from without, but from within. It doesn't really matter whether you're proud of them or not. It matters that they're proud of them. So just keep that in mind. Okay, any questions here?
No, but someone did have the great idea to have people share if their communities have been practicing acts of kindness or performing acts of kindness during COVID, to share some of the ways that they've been able to do that while maintaining social distancing. And then we did have one question. What are good mindfulness resources that people can access for free?
Let me see, I have some. So let me see if I can post them. I have access to several of those. So I'll try to get those together and post them so people can share some of those very simple kind of present things. And whoever's brilliant idea that was, we're 100% coming there. So last section here, and then we'll have a chance to do just what you suggested. So here we go. Okay, so we saw the poll, and that poll, can you just put the poll back up? Because I don't think the way it's set up we can answer it, but it helps me. Oh, yeah, okay. So here, so what I want, thank you. So these are some descriptions for people who have the disease of addiction. And I want you to pick out from that list 9, how many of those are appropriate when talking about someone who is struggling or suffering from the disease of addiction. So look through the list and just give me some numbers. I know this is tricky because people are worried about politically correct and they don't necessarily know what's out there to do that. And obviously I don't know who's answering what, but I am going to take a minute to go through this. So I'll give you another 20 seconds. All right, so can you just leave the poll up for me for a second? Because I don't have a list of those, Rebecca, but I'm going to talk about this. So obviously, when I do this, when I'm working about people first language and statements, I'm working with people in the jail. If somebody walked up to you and stuck their hand out to shake yours, not that they should do that now, and they said, "Hi, I'm an addict," are you going to have any kind of positive thought there? The answer to that question is probably no. So if you are using that word to describe other people, you are perpetuating a stigma. You are indicating that there is something negative about this disease. If you believe that addiction is a disease, you are saying there's something wrong with this person that is basically their fault. So people first language, you wouldn't want to be termed that. You should not use that term to describe other people. There's going to be some push with some of this words. I've sat in AA meetings and had some push around some of these. Clean. I am clean implies that at some point you were dirty. Would you want to describe yourself as dirty? Would you want anyone to say you were dirty? So when we're looking at that, you would say, I'm in recovery. If you're looking at a urine sample, it's negative. To try to go around using those words, all right? Using is sort of a fence word. I'm using again, you may hear people who have relapsed say that, and I try to correct them and say, you know, you have an illness that is a relapsing illness and you relapsed. because using has negative things, negative connotations too. That one's a little fancier. Alcoholic, yes, they will definitely use that in Alcoholics Anonymous and those sorts of things, but that language is coming back to alcohol use disorder. Because when we think, and I'm going to do a study here in a minute, substance use disorder, that is correct. That's what we're currently using. Anybody who comes up and introduces themselves to you as a junkie, you're automatically going to have negative connotations, not so much. Strung out, same thing. I was using heroin at the time. Strung out, people, again, don't associate with good things. We talked about clean and dirty, and drug abuser. Does anyone associate the word abuse with anything good? Again, probably not. So we do not want to stigmatize people by using that language, because it makes it harder for people to get help. There's a lot of shame and guilt around people already who struggle with the disease of addiction. And if we keep using stigmatizing language, that creates problems. And I will tell you, I mean, obviously I'm working with people who are in the recovery communities, and having them try to change how they present themselves to other people. I spend a lot of time doing that. Okay, quickly, because I do want us to have a chance to talk here. All right, so this is just a short summary of that, but words matter. You can see the study. These were people in the mental health field. They were given the case studies with the word someone with substance use disorder, which sounds more like an illness, versus substance abusers. And the people who got the titles, and these are clinicians who were reading about the people who were substance abusers, wanted them to receive punishment, and also indicated it was their fault. So and that's for the professionals who are supposed to be treating them. So how we present the disease of addiction is important, and we all need to make an effort. And that's one of the ways we can all help, is thinking about how we are addressing when we're speaking about people who have some sort of substance use disorder, and are we using language that puts them as a person first in talking about it. Okay, so for those of you who talked about isolation, one of the biggest things that happens is that people who struggle from some sort of substance use disorder frequently do that alone. So you know, people are sitting at home, you hear people talking about consuming alcohol, and it's not good to be sitting at home alone, drinking by yourself. Particularly for people who are in early stages of recovery, they really need that support from other people. And also, you know, a higher power, something beyond them. And being in isolation and not being able to connect during this pandemic is one of the things that they're talking about having, you know, increased overdoses, people relapsing. So this is a real problem. And I'm sorry, I was going to do this in the chat, but I do want to get to a place where I want you guys to talk. You can definitely respond to why it's dangerous, but I'm sort of telling you. And I want to talk about the last slide, and then here's some ideas you all had about how we can reach out to people when we're supposed to be socially isolating. But let me just share some ideas that I had about that. So here's how you can help. So first thing is, another talk for another day, but learn more about the disease of addiction. And what exactly goes wrong in your brain, and how saying, well, if you love me, you'd stop, just creates more shame. And it demonstrates, whoever is saying that, a lack of understanding of what basically goes wrong in the brain when somebody actually has the disease of addiction. And so the more people who learn about addiction and what really goes wrong, the better position we are to help and support people. We need to suspend judgment. We need to just be able to provide that listening ear and hear what they're having to say, because ultimately we do want them to get the help and support they need to get well. There are online meetings going on right now for people who are who need a meeting and want to go into those. NAAA, and if you're a family member who's struggling, so Al-Anon or Alateen or some of those, so you get support yourself, or for people in your congregations who may have someone who has you know, alcohol use disorder, and they're now in the house and struggling with the behaviors that come from that, and they need that support so they don't feel alone too. And then on the other end, running errands for them. So if somebody is struggling and they've got 2 kids at home, or they're managing an elderly parent who can't go out, can I go to the store for you? Could I bring, could I bring something and leave it on your doorstep? How about if I just deliver a meal to you? The coalition that I'm running is providing, we have a staff member, but we're also providing money to feed families. They're getting 3 hot dinners a week delivered to their house, because otherwise they wouldn't have any food. Just check that one off the list. You don't need to worry about where dinner's coming from tonight. And a lot of these families are struggling with opiate use disorder in Warren County. So I believe that's the all. And I would like to spend 10 minutes discussing, hearing what you guys are doing. If you have any questions or comments, that's my contact. And then sharing ideas for other ways to reach out and encourage people. But online, there are lots of online meetings for people happening here in this area. Thank you very much. Ms. Casey?
Great. So yeah, everyone, you should have the ability to unmute yourselves so that we can have a conversation. You can ask questions while you all are doing that. Christa, I'll ask you a question that came in the chat. Is it also judgmental to say if they wanted to get better, they would ask for help?
Is it judgmental to say that? There are multiple stages of change and people move to different stations. So I think instead of saying that, I'm here to support you. And when you're ready to get help, whatever you need, I'm here. Because people have to get to that place. Trying to get well is really difficult, and it's a lifelong commitment. You're not doing this for 3 days. It's not like I'm going on a diet for 2 weeks to lose 5 pounds and then I'm good. They have to do, whoever is in recovery has to do what it takes to maintain that recovery for the rest of their lives. So this is a long-term commitment. That stress is always going to happen to you. How am I going to deal with that? Am I going to reach for a bottle, or have I gotten coping strategies put in place that are going to help me? Do I have people I can reach out to who are going to support me? That craving, I have a friend who's in recovery he had a crack addiction, and he's been in recovery for 22 years now, and he says crack still calls him sometimes in his brain. Mm-hmm. This is an ongoing commitment. Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to open the floor for a couple minutes, and then we'll have a little wrap up. So if anybody has a question they'd like to share, please feel free.
Or an observation or something you've been doing, within your churches or your community, how you're reaching out to support people. We'd love to hear any ideas you have.
Yeah, I saw that someone also in the chat asked about the slides. I will talk about that in a couple minutes, but we just wanted to open the floor first. Oh, someone sent a question. What inspired Christa to do what she does?
I think I'm old. As a kid, M.ED was just developing, and I had several friends who had bad outcomes from drinking and driving, and that sort of was the beginning around this isn't a good thing. And then as I've gone along in my life, I have a fairly significant trauma history. My husband has a very, very significant trauma history. And trying to understand my own behaviors and why I do what I do, because that's sort of part of how we get well. Codependence, which is another lecture for another day, is on the addiction spectrum. And frequently happens to people who grew up in homes where there was someone who struggled with some sort of substance use disorder or mental health disorder. And it leads to a great deal of unhappiness. So I was already doing the work, but I've gotten deeper and deeper into this as I try to understand that part of the codependence. It doesn't necessarily involve using substances, but being addicted to people. So that's sort of the short answer to that.
We're getting some great comments in the chat. Carter Knapp shared, our congregation has been doing Zoom devotionals. Christy McMillan Goodwin said, I've been doing driveway chats with our church members. My husband and I take our lawn chairs and visit people in their yards. Jennifer Hall runs Valley Assistance Network, and one of the things they do is SBIRTS screenings for substance use and depression, and they work with Valley Health on it. And
Jennifer, we need you to come south. And I've heard great things about you from folks in the jail.
Well, here's a good question. My area is a rural area that has no substance abuse programs except for AA. What can we do to reach out to those in our area with these problems to help them at this time?
So I'm not sure where your area is. The grant that I was telling you that about made me had heart failure, I was writing to expand treatment in Shenandoah, Page, and Warren. So if that one comes through, that will start expansion in September. Online, I would encourage people to go to online groups and online supports for right now. And there is treatment, and the coalition that I have actually has money to pay. So if people have transportation problems, to pay to help people get to treatment locally. So like at Northwestern, and say if you're in Page County and you need to go to Shenandoah to get treatment, I do have some funds to help pay for that. And I do have some funds to help people pay the bills if they don't have the money for that. So there is some money around right now in this grant. There'll be far more money if I get it. But that would be my first recommendation.
I also wanted to share that we have a confidential warm line, and I'll send that information in the chat, but that can be a really good peer-to-peer service for community members or family members.
And it's local people are on that warm line too. So it's not like they're calling someplace out of the area. And that can help them get linked up with a peer support specialist who is someone who is in recovery to help guide them through recovery. And Northwestern does have that available through the planning district. Thank you for that reminder, Casey.
Yeah. It's also awesome to hear everyone sharing these. If you have a service or a program in the community that you would like to get more people involved with, we have applications through Youth Resource Alliance. The link was just sent there in the chat, but having your service, organization, program posted on Youth Resource Alliance is a really great way to spread awareness about it and get community members engaged. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up because we're approaching 11:30. I just want to say thank you, Christa, for this presentation. I know that I've taken a lot from it, and I am sure that each of our attendees have as well. And I want to thank our participants. We're grateful for your contributions to the community and for your desire to learn about how to best serve your congregations. I think it's really hopeful to be on this call and to see how many people are getting creative and making meaningful connections even when we're socially distanced. I know that we all benefited from Christa's presentation, so we want to make sure that you all have access to that. And we've also created a toolkit with resources, articles, and scripture related to our discussion today. So this can all be accessed with the link that I'm about to send in the chat. And there's a password to access these documents, and I'll send the password as well, but that password is FBS 2020 in all caps. Last two things I want to say is that our second edition of this series will be held on July 1st at 10 a.m. and we'll be sure to send out more information about how to register for that as we get closer to that date. And like I said, we're about to finish the organized part of this, but if you want to stay on, if you have questions that we didn't get to, I know there are a couple that are coming in the chat right now, please hang around for a couple minutes. We'll be on here for a bit and can still have a conversation together. So thank you all so much.
Thank you all very much. Hope I gave you some ideas. And for all of you who are going out to people who are isolated, thank you. Isolation is such a huge negative for so many people, and there's so many lonely people who just need that contact. You could make the difference in their life and just not even know it. So reaching out to people, even just elderly people in your neighborhood, and just saying, hey, just checking in, even if you don't know them, you are making a difference to somebody's day. Or leave a card that your kid makes on their door that just said, thinking of you, hope you're doing okay, for another neighbor. And that will bring huge smiles to their face. And it's an easy thing for your kids to do if they need, they're working on schoolwork, or you're trying to keep them from sitting in front of the television all day.